Hi and welcome to this video in which I want to show you how I base this overwhelming double page spread and how I distribute the colors so that it looks harmonious in the end and not too chaotic. This double page spread is from A Million Little Monsters by Lulu Mayo. If you are new to this channel, hi, my name is Ina. If not, welcome back. I want the page not to appear too colorful and chaotic in the end. But at the same time, I don't want to use just a limited palette of only 5 colors. Instead, I want to create my own color palette naturally. To do so, I start with the obvious colors first, like the sky, the water, the palm trees, and the mountain, for example. Then I add more colors and finally distribute them evenly across the characters. I'll tell you exactly what I pay special attention to when we get to that part. First, I start with the sky, which I want to make blue. And it should be a bit darker at the top than at the bottom. I use the Castle Arts watercolor pencils for the base layer. But as always, you can of course use whichever art supply you prefer and already have at home if you want to follow along with this video. I'll speed this part up a bit now because coloring the sky isn't that interesting. In my video about my plans for this month, I already mentioned that I don't want to create a sunset because I think such a multicolored sky would distract too much from all the characters and objects. Or rather, it would make the whole page look even more chaotic. There's already a lot going on this page, with so many monsters. I try to get as much pigment onto the paper as possible, without pressing too hard. Because later I don't want to color over the sky with colored pencils. And preferably not the water either. So I try to get a layer that is as opaque as possible. So that when I activate it with water later, it looks to some extent solid. Now I use a slightly lighter shade of blue. And for the very bottom, my lightest. I've often read in comments, not only on my own videos, that some of you feel intimidated by these highly detailed double pages and don't dare to color them. That's why I'm showing you in this video how you can approach a page like this. It sounds simple, but taking it step by step is always a good first tip. Next, I continue with the water. And then the largest areas are already colored in. As I already mentioned in my August plan video, I want the water to be turquoise blue. Again, I start with the darkest shade and first work on the shadow areas of the waves. Then I move on to the areas that have those lines, which suggest smaller waves. Since I will later go over these lines with a white paint pen to create reflections or foam crests, this gives me the highest contrast. The lines are also in the areas around the little duck boats and the swim rings, where the shadows are. I then continue with a slightly lighter turquoise shade. And finally, I fill in the gaps with the lightest tone. The blue of the sky brings a sense of calm to the image, while the turquoise tones create a summery, tropical feeling. I color the top edges of the waves with a very light blue tone, which is technically called turquoise as well. I'm not yet sure if one layer will be enough for the water, or if I will go over it with colored pencils. But for the sky, I would really prefer if one layer would be sufficient. But we will see. Then I looked at what the next big object was, and that is the ship's wing. Since it looks so wooden, I base it brown first. Because I know that I will definitely go over all the remaining objects again with colored pencils and only use the watercolor pencils as a base layer, I color here a bit more lightly and mostly in just one shade. Now I also use the brown for the trunks of the palm trees and see what else I can color with it. I decided on the barrel and one of the hot air balloon baskets. I also color this creature on the big dolphin brown, because apart from the horn, it reminds me of a walrus. Since I've already started with the palm tree, I continue right away and use a green tone for the leaves of the palms. I'll definitely use more green later, but for now I leave it like this and move on to the mountain, which I base in gray. While doing that, I noticed that I had forgotten this little waterfall here. Or rather, it's probably supposed to be a water slide. I quickly color it in turquoise and then continue with the gray again. I also color the frame of the ship's wing in gray, so that later it will look a bit like iron. Brown and gray are natural or muted colors. They don't stand out, appear natural, don't distract, and go well with all other colors. Next, I move on to the swimming rings that look like donuts. For these, I first use a beige tone, which I also use for the second hot air balloon basket. Beige can also be considered one of the neutral color tones. The glaze will be pink. Pink and the other following colors act as contrasting colors that draw attention. I also use this color for the unicorn sea monster, though it looks pretty cute for one. The character sitting on top doesn't have a boundary, so maybe this creature has two heads? In any case, I color it in the same color. The upper part of these creatures will be purple. Then I continued with these small duck boats, which will be yellow-orange. For that I have a darker yellow tone, which I also use for the rare water slide and two of the gondolas. I create a gradient with the yellow tones in some areas. Next, I take a lighter yellow tone to continue the gradient on the boats. And then I use my lightest yellow tone for the second water slide and the other two gondolas. I don't know why, but I've pictured yellow water slides from the very beginning. Sometimes the choice of color is simply a matter of intuition. The areas where I use the darker yellow tone I will probably add a bit more orange later, and the lighter water slide will remain just yellow. For the little boats, it would actually have been sufficient to use only one shade of yellow. But here I already blended in a gradient to make things a bit easier for later. Next, I'm using a lighter gray for the undersides of the dolphin. For most of them, the underside isn't really visible, but I'm especially applying it to the large one here. And since I already have the color in my hand, I also shade the clouds a little at the same time. Now, for the dolphins, I use my lightest blue tone from the sky again. I do want to color the dolphins somewhat realistically in gray, but I think a slight bluish undertone could look quite nice. Now, of course, the question is, how do I color all these characters? And how can I distribute my colors evenly so that one area does not contain a lot of one color while another area doesn't have any at all? As you can see here now, in the lower right corner, there is a lot of yellow, and above that are also the water slides. But on the other side, there is relatively little yellow. To balance that out, I am now coloring this monster that is relatively large in the background yellow as well, and start again with a darker yellow, which is already a bit orange. I am also base a character on the ship's wing in this color, and one that is in the water, as well as this little mini monster. Now I'm checking if I can use the color again further up on the other side. And I'm applying it to the hot air balloon in monster form. For the objects that I haven't completely colored yet, I'm now using the medium yellow tone to create a gradient there as well. Since the small monster next to the big one is basically the same, just smaller, I'm also coloring it yellow, but a bit lighter, and I'm not using the darkest tone. For the monster in the water, I have now colored the face light yellow. Then I noticed that there's a pumpkin monster sitting in the ship's wing. And accordingly, I went over the other yellow monster once more with a lighter yellow and used the darker yellow again for the pumpkin, as well as for the second pumpkin at the bottom right. Then I looked for other places to use the colors and colored one of these mummies yellow, as well as the belly of the one monster on this sea monster. Next, I took the brightest yellow tone and first completely colored in the yellow monsters that are not yet fully colored. After that, I thought about what I could color in green. I first decided on the cloak of the pumpkin on the right-hand side. Then on this monster that only has one eye, because it reminds me of Mike Wazowski from the film Monster Inc. The green monster with just one eye. Then I noticed that on the left side a bit of green was still missing as well, and I looked for where I could distribute the color there. I thought to myself that I should actually make all the monsters with only one eye green. But of course, that's a bit tricky with the one all the way on the right, because the green of the palm trees is directly next to it. So I didn't do that for now, and instead colored the other one-eyed monster green, including the one peeking out of the porthole. Next, I moved on to pink. However, I realized that this monster here is actually the same as the big one in the background. So I based that one in yellow as well. Then I really continued with the pink and decided to color in first the smaller monster in the background above the sea monster, as well as the tiny one in the swim ring. Then I noticed that there was still another one-eyed monster that needed to be green. Overlooking characters or objects among all these details once in a while isn't a big deal. As I said earlier, step by step. That's how you reach the goal. Or in this case, finish the page. Now I moved on to the left side. And here some monsters also got a pink base coat, as well as the cloud-shaped hot air balloon. I always tried to make sure I didn't place the same color twice right next to each other. Then I took the purple and colored this hairy monster. Purple somehow always suits witches. And this Maleficent-like monster at the bottom in the big bow. The hairy monster in the ship's wing also became purple, as well as another one, where I quickly colored the face in pink to make it a bit brighter. Now there weren't that many monsters left, and I took a turquoise tone for this dinosaur-like monster, and also colored the one-eyed monster with it. That way it looks a bit greenish, but not the same color as the palm leaves next to it. At that moment, I really thought it was the last one-eyed monster. I tried to color the monsters with this shade that do not necessarily have direct contact with water, at least not with the light parts of the water, to ensure there's enough contrast. I left this cloud-like monster a bit white to make it look more like clouds. Then I took my light blue from the sky again and colored a few more monsters blue, specifically the ones that are not in the sky but in the water, so that I don't have the same colors right next to each other. Now, almost all the monsters were colored, or rather based, and I looked at which color would go with the one in the top right corner. I thought I haven't used orange in that corner yet, or rather this darker yellow. So I based that one in yellow-orange as well. The mushrooms became purple, and the cloud-like face on the witch also got a bit of purple. Then I noticed that there was still a one-eyed monster, which of course I also colored green. And then there was another cloud monster that got a bit of green this time. Next, I colored the small monster on the top of the other monster's head and used a bit of green for the leaf as well. Then, of course, the question was how I should color these cloud-like structures on the larger monsters. And I decided on pink, because there wasn't that much pink in the sky on that side yet. This monster that I'm coloring here, I did in light yellow, since there was already pink and green right next to it, and the light yellow fit quite well. Finally, there were still these things left that the monster is holding. I have no idea what they are supposed to be, but I'm going to turn them into tambourines. So I colored them beige, just like the cat's head, and I added a bit of brown for shading. Because I wanted the double page spread to have a nice tropical feeling, I decided against brownish monsters and only used brown for wooden objects. That's why the little monster in the other boat also became blue. Then there were still the swim rings from the water slide missing, and I considered which color could still fit there, or rather which I hadn't used yet. I chose a purple ring for the pink monster, and the green monster got a blue swim ring. I then based the cat in the gondola in gray, just like the background in the portholes. Then I first looked at the page to see where there were still gaps. I lightly colored the mummy's bandages in gray, and then there was still the package left, for which I decided on green. The same goes for one of the characters in the gondola, and the second one became turquoise, just like these alien-like antennae on the monster's head. I will color the remaining horns with a gel pen at the end. Now there's another cloud-shaped head here, which gets a bit of purple shading. And then I thought about how to do the spots on the sea monster. And I decided to color those later with gel pens or a glitter marker. Then I used a darker blue again for the cloud-like part on the green monster. And the bow on the yellow monster became pink. Then I realized the mouth was still missing. So I checked which mouths were missing and colored all of them pink. I didn't want to add red as another color, just for the mouths. The eyes and the outline of the portholes I will color with a gel pen later. Here you can see how many watercolor pencils I used in total. It looks quite a lot, but since there are multiple shades of blue, multiple shades of turquoise, and also several yellows, in the end there are actually not that many different colors. Now I will activate the whole thing with a water brush, but you've probably seen me or someone else do that countless times before. It's not that exciting, so I took it outside and will now show you the finished result. I'll also show it to you up close again. I will probably have to go over the sky once more. And I will probably do the same with the water. But I think for the sky, I will just try a second layer with the watercolor pencils, by drawing on a palette with the pencils and picking up the color from there. For the water, I will probably use normal colored pencils, just like I will for the rest as well. I hope you now have an idea of how you can approach a page or even a double page spread with a lot of different things and characters, even if it first feels very overwhelming. And maybe you will now dare to tackle an overwhelming and intimidating page, or maybe even a double page. Bye and see you next time.